Time for us to look at the big political stories of the day and the revolving door seen in the leadership of some of the country's municipalities due to the formation, collapse of coalitions is exposing some gaps in the system. Several councils have been caught off guard, not knowing how to resolve some of the complications. Gauteng Human Settlements MEC Lebogang Maile, in the wake of the Tshwane Council leadership issues, said the provincial government would seek legislation to regulate coalition government agreements through the National Council of Provinces.
So we're joined now by political analyst Dr. Somadoda Fikeni on the line to take us through the process and what the legislation would entail. Dr. Fikeni, good morning and thank you very much for joining us.
Good morning to you and good morning to your viewers.
So, Somadoda Fikeni, we've always understood that there's quite a clear separation of powers between local, provincial and national government. 2 weeks ago, though, we heard from Premier David Makhura saying if the city of Joburg and Tshwane can't get their act together, he as Premier, or Gauteng as the province, would be forced to step in. What is the relationship between those different spheres of governance? How do they actually work when they work?
These are distinct but related. Local government municipalities ought to function well, but they are overseen by the provincial government. In the event they become dysfunctional and there is administrative chaos, then the provincial government can intervene by the way of assisting them recover or impose an administrator which will allow for services and for functionality to go whilst they are sorting out their challenges. And in some extreme instances, the municipality itself is dissolved and new elections are held. If there was dysfunctionality even at the level of council, not just in terms of the executive. And similarly, national government oversees provincial, departments, assist them here and there. But in this particular case, should provincial departments have challenges, then the premier of that province ought to intervene to resolve.
Dr. Fikeni, growing up, we've always been told that diversity is good for democracy. In fact, the more people in the field. However, in South Africa, as of late, that has not been the case. Why do you think that is, and what should we be looking to do now in order to make sure that the citizen, for example, doesn't end up being cheated out the most?
Certainly, diversity for any democracy, particularly having a strong opposition, is always very healthy for democracy. But in South Africa, you've had a one-party dominated system for some time. And even when opposition parties had an opportunity to run the metros in 2016, that was done not because they had common values, common objectives, and therefore being brought together by that. It was this strong feeling that ANC had to be kept at bay. ANC was said to be arrogant, and it was said to be, embracing or having high tolerance for corruption. Now, that particular arrangement has fallen apart because it was not based on those common values. The EFF and the DA no longer see eye to eye. And that is the reason why you're beginning to see such cracks, because no one had an outright majority in those places. You always had parties that didn't have 50 plus 1%, especially DA or ANC. And now we are seeing the realignment of politics. And most of this largely depends on personalities and networks, as you saw Mashaba being DA but working better with the EFF. And that is where we find ourselves. But I don't think, though, we should be extremely worried because power is distributed into the judiciary, into parliament, as well as the executive. Our judiciary has proven to be extremely independent. Even when a majority party was in place, they were reminded that they can't just use a crude majoritarian approach. They ought to use the rules, and they should demonstrate that they have applied themselves and they are working within the rules. And also, the civil society we have is equally vigilant. So there are various powers located in different areas as watchdogs.
Dr. Fikeni, how much of this is party politics? We know, for instance, Gauteng is ANC, it's in the hands of the ANC. Tshwane used to be in the hands of the ANC. They lost it in the last local government election. And now they are threatening to place Tshwane under administration because of what they're calling, the chaos that's playing out in the municipality, which is not unique to that municipality. I mean, we saw it play out in the city of Joburg, Nelson Mandela Bay. There are currently just over 40 municipalities around the country that are under administration. So how much of this could potentially be politics, with the ANC looking at it as an opportunity, to either get into Tshwane or to show the shortcomings of the DA-led municipality there?
Well, I do think that it is reasonable to assume that it's a combination of both politics and pure administrative reasons, for a simple fact that if Tshwane, for example, has had the challenges over a prolonged period, remember, it's not last year, it's not the year before last, that Tshwane had Msimang fighting with the municipal manager for a long time, that you had wrong people appointed without qualifications, that you had a tender over $1 billion, which was said to be irregular and so forth. Now you can't treat the bigger municipalities such as your metros and say, but there is a certain local municipality under the ANC which is dysfunctional. That's where you have economic activities and most of the GDP of the country going. So the courts are to decide as to whether this was a rushed intervention by the ANC for political reasons, or there have been interactions, because that is the key thing, whether there have been interactions with the department which has now intervened and the local municipality to say, please correct this, correct that. If you don't correct it, then we are likely to be left with no choice but to intervene. So at this stage, I can't make that determination because the courts will be able to examine the evidence of interaction over time. Johannesburg was relatively functional under Mashaba, so theirs would be a more recent challenge, and they've quickly resolved it by having elections. And Nelson Mandela Bay Metro is another area where it's another province which has a prerogative to see changes taking place, to intervene or even impose administrator if politics get on the way of effective service delivery.
Thank you very much for joining us. Political analyst Dr. Somadoda Fikeni there, taking us through the process that needs to happen in order to resolve the crisis in the Gauteng metros. Coming up after a break, we take a look at important stories that are not on the front pages.